afternoon. I'm Courtney Bailey with Leadership Austin.
And I'm Trenzio Turner with Austin PBS.
So welcome to this month's Engage panel series on call-out culture. Call-out culture has become more widespread with the pandemic, social unrest, and political upheaval. For the sake of this conversation, we define call-out culture as publicly criticizing a person, group, or brand for participating in oppressive or racist behavior.
And call-out culture should not be confused with canceling someone. Although being canceled is a product of being called out, canceling is the phenomenon of not supporting individuals, groups, or brands due to what some consider to be offensive or problematic remarks or ideologies. In some cases, people are socially exiled.
Now, before we meet our panel, we would like to make a few quick announcements. So first, we want you to engage with us. So please share your questions and comments for the panelists. That would be really great to get your input into the conversation.
Second, we want you to share your feedback. Please fill out our 3-question survey at the end of the panel.
All right, so now we're going to introduce our panelists. So joining us today is Kelly Coleman. Kelly is a community organizer. Welcome, Kelly.
Hi.
Oh, sorry. Next, we have Esteban Delgado. Esteban is the director of the new Office of Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at UT Austin. It's also known as JEDI.
Thank you so much for having me today, Courtney and Trenzio.
Yeah.
Thank you. And we have Sandra Olarte Hayes from Color of Austin Counseling.
Hi, thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
And rounding out the panel is Tiffany Washington from Dobbin Cobb Garden Farm.
Hey, y'all. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Welcome, everyone. Glad to have you.
All right. So as we defined earlier, call-out culture happens when someone publicly criticizes a person, group, or organization for oppressive or racist behavior. So I want to ask you all, what is the difference between speaking up and calling folks out? And I'm going to start with Tiffany.
So I don't really see a difference. There's speaking up and calling somebody out. You basically have to, we're not beating around the bush. So sorry, y'all. I'm not the type of person to kind of beat around the bush or kind of find pleasant words to make things sound pretty for people. So there is no difference. You know, if I'm going to call you out, I'm going to call you out and I'm going to speak to what it is that you're doing that I may feel like is oppressing me. And that's speaking up. It's the same thing.
I respect that, Tiffany. Esteban.
So I think this is a great question. I personally think that there is some nuance here, in calling out. I personally believe that there is a bit of a shaming factor, right? You're shaming, right, because you're wanting to get some action, right, out of either leadership or your government or systems of power. But I think in speaking up, right, you are trying to create a dialogue, right? You're speaking up, you're trying to call attention to an inequity that's existing in a community, right? But I think that there is a differential here that even as leaders or leaders in the community, we need to call attention to and not automatically be like, oh, if somebody's speaking up in the community, I'm being called out, right? Even throughout the pandemic, we've come to recognize that in the community, right, so many injustices in the community have been highlighted and so many more people are speaking up because time is of the essence. And so we need to go back and rethink, just because people are speaking up doesn't mean that we're being called out over and over again. We're just being called to the table to dialogue more and more.
All right. Thank you, Esteban. Kelly.
So for me, when I hear that, I think about, the differences around whether this is about an interpersonal thing, and oppression is not interpersonal. Oppression is systemic. And I think that's the difference. And just speaking up is what we should all be doing. But we should be doing it, I think, or what I try to do and what I've learned to do and been mentored and developed to work with others to do is to help folks be able to push with that voice, because just speaking up is good, but we need to be doing more of that. And in terms of the difference between calling someone out and speaking up, I mean, if you're experiencing violence or, even just meanness, right? You should speak up. Or if you don't understand something, people speak up, right? So I just think it's different on a lot of different scales.
I like what you said. Oppression isn't interpersonal; it's systemic and institutional. I want to put that back in the space. Sandra, you want to add your voice to that?
Yeah, I think I would add to what Kelly just shared. It feels like when we set up a binary between speaking up and calling out, I feel like the words matter less than the context, and whether it's interpersonal or systemic. And so I think of speaking up as being about a system or an issue, pattern, whereas calling out feels more like it's about a person or an interpersonal issue.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you for that.
So the next question. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kelly. Keep going.
I was just gonna say, I feel like, but we need to call systems out too. We need to call them to the square, and it needs to be pressure like that. And corporations are walking around as being treated as people right now in this country. So it would be it might behoove us to be able to call out some of these systems and institutions. So just something to think about.
No, I think that's good. And I think y'all basically kind of hit on this, but I want to make sure for the audience that everyone's clear where you stand when it comes to call out culture. Is it socially just, or does it present a social problem? How would y'all take that? And Tiffany, let's start with you since you picked this up at the beginning.
I don't know what that is. I'm just keeping it real with y'all. I'm just in the community, and I'm just around the neighborhood. So all of the language, when we start to deal with regular people that the systems or whatever organizations or institutions are supposed to be reaching out to, all of this stuff is mundane to them. They don't identify. So when you ask me about call out culture, or you ask me about speaking up, that I don't identify with these words that have been put in front of me to be some type of box that I have to identify my presentation of what it is that I am experiencing when dealing with the powers that be. So I don't know what that means.
No, I respect that. You speaking your truth on this is what it is to you, not these words that have necessarily been come up and trying to identify with what you're saying.
Right.
All right. Thank you for that. Estevan.
Yeah, I'd love to add on to that, because I love what Tiffany just said. And I was talking with a friend after preparing for this panel a little bit yesterday. And for me, this is entirely, I think, complex and brings up a lot of emotions, because I feel like I've lived in a society that's really kind of dictated how do we come to the table when we try to talk about these issues, right? Like I've been, as I've tried to climb, not only professionally, but within the community, and trying to do what's right for not only myself, but the community, I find myself second guessing, right? Like how should I go about things, right? And how do I build my toolkit of how do I go about achieving justice in the community? And so I think when it's at the end of the day, it's not, is this right? Is this wrong? I think it really comes to being a question of what's the best tool for this situation? What's going to achieve the best end result? But what I consistently think more and more about is we're living more and more in a polarized world. And we live in a society where people don't want to dialogue with each other. People don't want to come to the table and talk about an issue at hand. And so when I think about, is this an opportunity to call a system or a person or an organization out, is it really going to be an opportunity then to sit in dialogue, right, to move forward, right? Because if we just call out, we get what we want, right? Are we actually creating change, or are we just getting a momentary win, and are we not moving progress forward? So it's really incredibly nuanced, and it's hard.
Yeah.
I think
Go
it's
ahead, Kelly.
important. Sorry, I'm not good at this.
No, you're good. You're good.
I'm one of them people that like the dialogue, so I just be talking. But I think we have to be clear about, who community is too, whenever we're talking about this, right? Because the way that we talk with our community is going to be different than the way that we approach institutions, right?
Right.
And the reasoning and everything is just different, And I think that people throw the word community around like that means everybody, and it don't. It don't mean everybody. I may not be talking to you. You know what I'm saying? So I think we got to be clear, I think, in those terms, to be specific about community. And then in terms of like the language, right? A lot of times this type of language starts off as like an academic thing, right? Like how academics are sort of coining things. And if it doesn't make sense, to use that type of language, then I think, it can be sort of imposed on folks, right? And it's not always helpful. But I like that we're thinking about how we come to the table and what's okay and what's not okay, and that's about comfort and power dynamics, right? Like how comfortable, people used to be safe, right? People used to talk about, oh, I'm not safe, I don't feel safe. Sorry for using that voice, but but you usually are, and it just means that you are uncomfortable, right? And so,
that part.
Yeah, that's good. Sandra, do you have anything?
Yeah, I was just thinking how much of it depends on the context and on the power differentials. And so, I think call out culture, this term that we're using, if it's the only tool that we have, it might not be moving things forward, engaging in relationship and in dialogue and shifting things. If it's one of many tools, or if there's a huge power differential, then it might be really helpful. And so I think this question of like, is it socially just or is it a social problem? I think it depends on how we use it.
Good. Thank you all.
Appreciate that. Sandra, this next question is for you. You bring the therapeutic lens, right? And so I want to hear from you, what is the impact of call out culture, and can you speak to the potential psychological impacts on the individual that's being called out, even the individuals that's doing the call out, and the community at large?
Yeah, I think it depends. I think for the person being called out, if it's a harm that they caused that they knew about and didn't care about, being called out might not do much. If it's a harm that they didn't know, it might lead to a lot of shame, shame that most folks want to get away from, which leads to defensiveness, blaming, doing anything to avoid that shame. Sometimes it can lead to an apology that might be genuine from the social pressure from the folks in their lives giving them participating in it, or it can lead to an apology that's performative, just to be welcomed back into the community. For the person doing the calling out, I think it also depends on what they're needing in order to heal from that harm. If they're looking for a sense of taking power back, of validation, of telling their story, that could be something that calling out can really help with. If they're looking for meaningful accountability, an apology, change, it may or may not take them there. And how the community responds and if the community supports them, I think will really affect how they will feel psychologically afterwards, and if their needs have been met.
Thank you, Sandra.
All right, Tiffany, this next question is for you. Call out culture can be empowering because of its ability to hold people accountable. You have used your social media platform to call out folks demand accountability from community leaders, and speak up for what you believe in.
Right.
What is your motivation behind calling these leaders out, and how has it affected your relationships or reputation in the community?
Cause they not gonna try to kill me in a part of the system. Like a lot of times the people that I speak about or that I call out or that I bring attention to, the things that they do are harmful to the dynamics that we have to come up against as just everyday regular people, marginalized people in the community. See, I work and I move around in spaces where people are not recognized. And so when I have something to say, I'm gonna say it. There's nothing that's gonna stop me from saying it, and we can talk about it because everybody know where I'm at. You know what I'm saying? You're more than welcome to come. We can talk about it or whatever. But I feel like no, like it's like following a leader over a cliff, or you're watching people follow somebody to their demise, and so you want to try to say something before the whole community or the whole realm of people that you see being harmed is they're just gone. And so that's why I do it, because they will try to kill you. Like, they will try to take away the resources that you have. They will try to act like they're not taking away the resources. I live it as a Black farmer, as an agriculturalist, especially right here in Travis County. There is no Black farming. It's been completely taken away from the Black community, right? So how are we supposed to eat? How are we supposed to feed ourselves? We have to become dependent on a system, on an institution, right? So no, that's why I do it. And when it comes to like my reputation or whatever, it don't matter to me. I'm a veteran. I'm a United States Navy veteran. So what is it that you beating down veterans, you beating down people that supported, defended their country. I have tough skin, and we talked about that yesterday when it comes to a lot of the call out culture and the call people back in and stuff like that. A lot of people just too soft. They just too is they get so shocked and amazed that somebody has the audacity to disagree with them, or that somebody has the audacity to not see things their way and want to hold them accountable for something that they've done wrong. And so when I do that and somebody is like, oh, she just tripping, and there go Tiffany going ham on her social media or whatever. No, months later, what I said comes to pass, and then everybody is like, "Oh my God, I can't believe it." It's
Right.
just I don't know.
Right. No, I think that's great. When someone's livelihood is at stake and there's danger, you call out and say what you feel like you need to say. So I appreciate you sharing that. And if we didn't say it yesterday, thank you for your service. That cannot go without saying.
Thank you.
You bet.
And I want to really elevate what Tiffany said. Like, I know I laughed when you said they're not about to kill me, but this, the stuff, what we're talking about, the institutional issues, the power dynamics, the respectability politics in these communities with the gatekeepers and whatnot, that is a form of violence, and it can kill you emotionally, mentally, psychologically, and physically, as well as spiritually, and it weighs a lot on people of color. So I want to acknowledge what you just said.
Thank you.
So I appreciate that. Kelly, this was for you. So you've been an organizer for quite some time. I remember meeting you when I first moved here back in 2010. So you witnessed folks being called out, and you have been experienced being called out during your time at the City of Austin Equity, Office. How did you handle being called out, and what has been your biggest takeaway from those experiences?
So this is the piece where I think, you can be called out and it can be a good thing, or it can be, a bad thing. And it's regardless if you being called out is the right thing, or you being called out for the right things, right? Because I still don't believe I was being called out for the right things, but that's okay, right? I did learn something though, and I did have some takeaways. And it was really about, being Black and being in an institution and what you can say and what you can't say, right? And who has consequences and who doesn't. And so the people that I'm actually accountable to, when everything happened, there were conversations, right? I got sat down by two people that I really respect, and I listened. And so, but then I also sat down with some other folks that I'm accountable to and that I respect a lot. And, it was a different type of conversation. So I think it's good. You're not really in a real relationship or in a real community with people if they can't tell you, pull your tail when you act and, when you act and how they don't think you should be acting, or if they don't agree with you, right? It's like, how do you know you in a true friendship or in a true relationship if you never butt heads, right? You've never had a disagreement. You know what I'm saying? So I think the way it went, the way that it happened though, was deeply rooted in anti-Blackness, and I believe that to I leave this earth. And but I still learned a lot, right? And I learned, I'm not used to working for a city, right? I'm used to doing birth work. That was what I was doing before. And so it was a different experience, and it was heavy. I mean, being in the newspaper, right? And all the stuff that came with it, and the work that we were trying to do too, right? I was worried that I had, that I could have sacrificed, right? Or put at risk the larger work that we were trying to do, They already, it's already sort of, not something that people want to deal with, right? But I think it can be a balance. So sometimes people will call you out, right? Like, think about all the call out around critical race theory. They ain't right. That ain't right. That's wrong, and we just fundamentally disagree, right? But but somebody getting called out, or an organization being called out for mistreating queer folks or mistreating Black folks, to me that makes sense, right? So it just depends, I think, on where you're at, who you are, what your life is, who you're connected to, who your people are, and who's doing the calling out.
I don't want to belabor this, but I do want to touch on something that you said before we go on. You said you weren't called out in the right way. What did that mean when you said that?
I wasn't called out in the right way. Like, I feel like I'll retract that.
Okay.
I think that there is no way really to call someone out or in or speak up, right? It's about you getting your message across, right? I think what happened to me, in this particular instance that we're talking about, was different, right? Like, people came for my livelihood and my job and said that I said things that I didn't say. And so it was a different thing. And what motivated it too, right? Like I said, was deeply rooted in something else, And it's weird, right? Because, I identify as a Black woman, but look at me, right? And so, it's interesting though, because the way that played out, right? That wasn't the conversation. I was being, if y'all want to know, it was around sort of a Latino, like being accused of being anti-Latino, right? Or Latina, Latinx. And so I think that it can be really complicated. It can be really complicated, and you have to watch how you say things now. People police it. I mean, we're all sort of, it's this weird way that we're being surveilled too with social media. And anything you put on paper or in a text or in an email or in a message or on the internet, it lives forever, right? And so, I mean, just being conscious of that as a parent, because before, when we were kids, we used to, hey, is your refrigerator running? Right? Like, we could do stuff like that, and it was funny. But now, it's not okay. Like, you got to be really careful what you text, how you talk to people, because people are recording, or everything lives forever now. So
I feel you. Thank you for elaborating more on that. Kelly Trenzio.
Esteban, you work at the LBJ School of Public Affairs in the newly formed Department of Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and as we said earlier, also known as JEDI. The department solely focuses on scaling equity by recruiting more underrepresented students and curating cultural programming. From a justice lens, when does calling out become a form of abuse or pose structural imbalances such as performative allyship?
Definitely. I think this is a great question. And I think it also, kind of hits a little bit on what Kelly was just mentioning in her example. I think there's a great quote by MLK, and I wrote it down. It's from Where Do We Go From Here? It's, power without love is reckless and abusive. And then it goes on to say, justice at its best is love, correcting everything that stands against love. And, we centered this, the kind of interplay between love and justice and deciding to put justice into the name of the JEDI department. But I think, when we call out to cancel, right, that in a sense, right, can become abusive, right? If we don't either have the full story, we don't have all the facts, there are two sides to everything. And if we don't have everything and we decide to kind of, make a decision that we're either going to call somebody out, we're going to try to cancel, right, to get, as a means to get what we want or need in a community, right, then, we might be messing with somebody's livelihood, and sometimes we can't always backtrack, right? We might be messing up an opportunity to dialogue with someone. And so I think it then fits into this kind of interesting area where calling out then becomes abusive, right? It then becomes a tool that might not be helpful in the community, right? It doesn't actually create an opportunity for us to dialogue. Which is, I think, really what we're trying to do. We're trying to create dialogue so that we can move forward.
I love that quote. Power without love is reckless and abusive. If you have that power, but without love, it can get out of hand quick. Thank you for that.
I appreciate it. Well, anybody else want to add, before we go to the next question, anybody else want to add on to about the power dynamics and structures? No, y'all good? All right. We do Kelly?
I think that's everything.
Okay.
I think the power dynamic and the structure is everything, because if you're in a situation, where I think about birthing people, right, and you're in one of the most vulnerable situations ever, and in the moment, it's hard to have agency, right? And it's hard to navigate those systems, and the power dynamic is huge, right? When you're dealing with an institution and I'm thinking about going into a hospital to have a baby, right? And so, how do the power dynamics are always at play. There's always power dynamics at play. And I think it's different whenever we're talking about something that's more interpersonal versus something that is sort of like a state violence issue or, systemic or institutional even.
Right. And even when you call out people, sometimes like who gets canceled and who gets punished and deemed the wrongdoer versus who gets to be back in society is a big thing too that speaks to the power dynamics as well. Go ahead, Esteban.
I was just going to add to that, Courtney. I mean, again, I think it's really nuanced in the sense too, like, as a person of color with seen and unseen identities, you want to leave your community, right, better than you entered it, right? And so, thinking about, again, like, how do you do that, right? And, given the power that you have, if you do not have much power, right, maybe it is that tool of being able to call out, right? Maybe that might be your only option. And so I think about, right, all of the people that were getting COVID and that were dying during the pandemic, right? And I also think about voting rights and not being able to cast your ballot, right, in a easy location. To be able to defend your democracy and to practice, democracy. And so how then are you going to make your voice heard if these are structural inequities that just keep on getting practiced over and over and over again, and you've tried to voice, then, is it really going to be that abusive to call somebody out if you don't have that much power, but you can amass, right, your group, your community to make a stand, And so, power inequities in community, have a big interplay here, just as my other panelists were saying.
Yeah. Earlier, Sandra mentioned apologizing, right? So I want to go back to that. Is an apology or remorse by the individual that's deemed a wrongdoer enough to move forward or be reintegrated back into the community, especially if they've been canceled? And if not, what needs to happen first? Who would like to? I see you leaning in, Kelly. You got something you want to say?
I was still thinking about, like we can't be thinking about institutions and like the COVID thing that Esteban just brought up. Like, that's why we can't be by ourselves doing that. That's why we have to organize. That's why we have to be with each other and push from the outside on these institutions. Because I think that's what we have a lot of now, are like these very sort of individual activists a lot of the time who aren't connected to a group that holds them accountable. That's why they all like, those little things that be outside of a car lot, they just be all in the way. Yes, that's what we have, a lot of that, and my kids make fun of me because I'm older, and so I don't do social media as much, but I'm getting better. And that can happen. It's hard to know who's actually connected to people, right? And I think that's different with Tiffany, because she's actually connected and rooted in a community. You know what I'm saying? It's a lot of folks out there, like, we got people outside of our city supporting elections of people here that they don't know nothing about. They don't know these people's relationships to our community, right? They don't know the history. History is so important to this conversation. It's like baseline. You've got to know it. It's required.
Jump in, Tiffany. I see you. She's like, tag
me. Yeah, that's very important. What Kelly said is very, very important to me, right? Because when it comes to agriculture, and people are like, are you teach me how to farm and stuff like that? I don't teach people how to farm, right? I teach people about the history of Black agriculture here in Austin, and based upon that history, I believe that you should want to go out and learn how to grow food, because we have been denied the opportunity here in Austin for nearly 200 years. That's what the city of Austin told me with their most latest resolution, when they apologized to the Black community, right? So when it's time for me to talk about history and a lot of the things that are incorrect about our history in the Black community, when it's presented to us, and I'm like, no, that's incorrect, I then have to hold accountable the people whose missions it is to preserve our history, right? And so when I have to go out and do that, and they have no clue, they're asking me where the information is coming from, or they just brush it off as if the documentation or the receipts that I can actually go pull up and go research at like the Austin Library or the state records aren't real. It's a huge problem for me, because you're changing the narrative of the history by not recognizing it and not understanding that a lot of the reason we're in the position we're in is because you've taken history way away from what it actually is, and we can no longer move forward because we're stuck right here. Because you got to get it right. We have to get it right, keep it tight before we can move forward, or else it's going to continue to be a cycle. We're continuing to find ourselves in this cycle of the same conversations because no one's acknowledging the history, like Kelly said. So that's just kind of how I feel about it.
Someone made a comment. Well, actually, first, before we go to that comment, Sandra, do you want to add anything? I want to make sure we get your voice in there.
think in response to that question, nothing new.
Okay. Sky Jessica said, history matters, racial and social identity matters, when, where, how matters, relationships and power dynamics are everything. And that's real. And people may not even think that that comes into play with call out, but it really does. So I just wanted to bring Sky's voice into that conversation.
Yeah.
Oh, Kelly, go ahead.
Go ahead, Kelly.
I just wanted to go back to some of the stuff that Sandra was talking about earlier and thinking about, because it's a spectrum, right? Because you have it where, it could be institution versus institution or system versus system calling each other out. And then it could be, a group of people interacting with that, or, individuals. And then you can have individuals and individuals. And sometimes that can be really abusive. Just to think about, what you brought up, it could be, right? And I think it depends on everything in that spectrum. It depends on everything that Sky Jessica listed in the comment, right? History matters, racial and social identity, absolutely, because that's tied to power. When, where, and how, right? Relationships, I think, are also really important, and power dynamics. And it makes me think about what we talked about yesterday around transformative justice and sort of, looking at different ways of being accountable to people,
Thank you for that.
Go ahead, Esteban. I'm sorry, Sandra.
Oh, no, it's okay. You go ahead.
Oh, Sandra, no, go ahead.
Sandra, go ahead. Then Esteban.
Okay, I was just going to say, kind of along the lines of what Kelly just brought up around restorative and transformative justice, and what are we moving towards? Who are we calling out to? Are we calling out to the greater community, to our more proximal community who can help us hold folks accountable? And I think, what this brings up for me is a real question around the person or the people, the community that's been harmed. What do they really need, and what is the most effective way of getting those needs met? I'm thinking about a transformative justice process that I'm a part of right now. And, I personally am not interested in having that person be canceled. That feels like replicating carceral politics. I'm interested in having the harm not happen to more people. And so my hope is that through transformative justice, through including the community, our community, that can happen. And that might come through a meaningful apology. That might come from treatment. That might come from therapy. But that I don't believe that making sure this person never works again is going to keep this harm from happening again.
I think that works in certain situations, right? Because
for sure.
I had this conversation with someone who does a lot of work around policing and police brutality. And we were talking about transformative justice, and she was like, I don't want to sit down with the person that, killed my community member, right? I don't want to do that. I don't know if I have it in me, right? So it's folks who are working around abolition, I think we have to, this is a good conversation, I think, to be having, right? About how we approach this. Is it getting us where we want to be, right? Are we able to change behaviors? Are we able to build something together, right? What are we working towards? Yeah, I like that, Sandra.
Yeah. I just want to honor what you just named, that it's not always possible. Folks, it might not always feel safe. And so we have to really look at in each situation what that person, that group of people needs, and really honor that. And so if the community can come in and create accountability to where that person doesn't have to stand alone or sit down with that other person if they don't feel safe, that it's important that we do that. I just really want to agree with what you just named.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about calling in. And in case folks aren't aware, the call-in approach involves holding those who have participated in oppressive and racist behavior accountable for their actions by engaging in dialogue and productive discourse. How do you feel about calling in as an alternative to calling out? And if we are calling someone in, what does this process look like? And Sandra, I know you just mentioned that, and Kelly, that sometimes it may not feel safe doing that. So in those cases, is there room for call out and call in? And if so, what does it look like?
Or transformative justice, like you said, Kelly.
Yeah.
I think certain people are never safe. I think that certain people do not have guaranteed safety, right? And I think others have an expectation and are entitled to safety and protection, right, from these systems. And I think that's what it boils down to a lot of the time. It's not always that clear, right? But I think that's a piece of it. And calling in, I think is more about, it's about the relationship. It's about how you do it. But I also feel like it can be cultural too, right? Like if I'm out of pocket and I'm thinking about, and my family see me doing something and they call me out in the group chat, right? We got a group chat. They talk about me in the group chat. It's from a different place, right? And I feel it in a different way. And it may be call out or call in, but I think it's about the relationship. It's about, the culture you're creating, where you're at. I do think a little bit of what Tiffany talks about of people being just like very, I don't want to say soft, but for lack of a better term, right? It's hard for folks to hear like the brutal and honest truth of where some people are coming from. And it's harder to hear, I think, from Black women, right? And from other people of color.
Mm-hmm.
People don't want to hear that.
I want to ask you a question real quick before we go to call to action. Just to make sure that we cover all bases. So there's a saying, if you insult in public and then apologize in private, your apology does not count. Should the same philosophy be applied to those individuals who've been wrongfully called out or canceled? And how do they achieve justice in this case? Because we've been focusing on the folks, being called out and assuming that they're wrong. But what if they're not wrong, right? What if they were wrongfully called out? Then what?
Right. A lot of times those things just go untalked about, right? Like a lot of times that doesn't get addressed and people usually don't apologize in my experience. But then you see things, right, that end up happening, things that transpire that let you know, oh, right, maybe this didn't happen. I think it's harmful, right? Because people don't have to come with receipts. People don't really have to, they can make up things and just say, whatever. And things get interpreted too, right? We interpret things and add meaning to things or value or take it away based on who we are and our experiences as well. So, it just depends. I think when you call in somebody, you're doing it from a different place usually than when you call them out.
So I heard it's like it is what it is once that happens, kind of. That's
it's done. I mean, it's done. And I mean, there's certain things that people can't come back from, right? Once they've been accused, I think about Emmett Till and like I was on this thing yesterday around reproductive justice and white women's virtue, and all they had to do was say a Black man did it, right? Those 5 words, or a brown person did it, right? And there's hundreds of stories across the country where that happened, and they said it and it wasn't true, right? The woman that drowned her kids in the pond in her front yard, the guy out of Roxbury that killed his wife to collect the insurance money, right? Like they had arrested somebody, right, when he said a Black man did it. So there's so much historical context and like identity and power and all that, I think, wrapped in when you accuse somebody or call somebody out and it's not true.
I love that you just said that, because people think call out, because we're using that terminology, so it sounds like it's a new thing. But you just mentioned the historical, like Emmett Till, like that. That was the epitome of call out, like So I appreciate you saying that.
Yep. I think it goes back to what Tiffany said. Like, they're not gonna kill me.
I feel you on that.
people got different consequences for engaging in this stuff, you know?
Yeah.
All right. Yes. Before we get to our call to action, because we're almost at that time, I want to remind folks to please complete our brief survey at the end of the panel. We really appreciate your input on all the things that we've heard today from our panel. Now we're going to get to our final calls to action, and it's going to be a two-part question, so bear with us. And we're going to start off with Kelly. So I'm going to ask the first part, and then Courtney's going to come back and ask the second part, and everyone will get a chance to answer. All right. First part is, earlier we talked about calling in as an alternative to calling out. However, if calling in is not the best strategy, how would you recommend we hold individuals and organizations accountable for their oppressive behavior? Again, Kelly, let's start with you, and then we'll go to Sandra, Tiffany, and Esteban.
I think that if you're a student of social movement and of history, you know that there's different ways that we can hold institutions accountable. And to me, the best way and the way that has made the most sense, because policy, you know, people are like, oh, we need policy change, but I feel like culture eats policy for breakfast every day. I think it's more about organizing and building power in the people that are experiencing the brunt of oppression in our society. That's the answer I have for that.
Culture eats policy for breakfast. I had to write that down. Sandra.
I think both calling in and calling out are like important tools in a toolbox. You know, for some folks, hearing the impact of their actions is enough to lead to accountability. For others, they need the whole world to say that what they did was unacceptable in order for them to acknowledge it. But I think, to echo what Kelly said, I think the way we respond when we can't call in is through organizing, through developing collective power, and through strategy.
Thank you. Tiffany.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, y'all. I'm a disabled veteran, so my PTSD be working sometimes.
You're all right. I got you. Earlier, we talked about calling in as an alternative to calling out.
Right.
However, if calling in is not the best strategy, how would you recommend we hold individuals and organizations accountable for their oppressive behavior and actions?
Right. Okay. I completely agree with what Kelly has said about that situation. But I'm going to keep records. I'm going to document it, because don't nothing lie like the paperwork. They always want you to come with your paperwork. So now I got to come with my paperwork. So what I'm going to do is, every time that I have an incident, I'm going to write it down. I'm going to take very detailed notes, and I'm going to make sure I pull all the records to support my notes. And I'm gonna keep that record until it's time, I guess, to call you in. And then once I gotta call you in, like I did, I have to come bring my big old green binder to the table. So now that we're here, how can we fix this? I think that that's a part of it. People being able to recognize when they've been harmed, and be able to appropriately document it, so that they have a case. You know, you have this case that's presentable. You don't have to be emotional about it, because that's where people get me. They try to say I'm so emotional, but I am, because I have big feelings, and I'm very, very passionate about the work that I do. So to combat that, for me, I have to keep records and keep notes, so that we can just look at it, and you don't have to be overwhelmed by the power with which I'm speaking, or any of those things. And we just kind of go from there. That's how I feel about it.
That sucks that you have to go through that process, but it goes back to the power dynamic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Esteban?
Can you repeat the question one more time, please?
Yeah, no problem. Calling in as an alternative, earlier we talked about calling in as an alternative to calling out. However, if calling in is not the best strategy, how would you recommend we hold individuals and organizations accountable for their oppressive behavior and actions?
Definitely. Well, I would say I would agree with all my panelists. I think they've presented, all great tools, within the toolkit. But I think I would go back and say I ultimately I think agree most with my panelist here, Kelly. I think organizing, it would probably be the best way to try to get the best results. And to Tiffany's point too, you have to keep the receipts. If things keep on happening and keep on getting worse, you want to have that record to be able to go back and show that, hey, these things keep on happening and they got to get better.
All right, thank you all. Courtney?
So I want to squeeze in one more question. Do y'all have any advice for the individuals who have been called out and or canceled? Like, what advice would you have for those individuals?
Listen, just stop. It's not. No one is trying to hurt you. No one is trying to intentionally do you harm. It's just a criticism. You know what I'm saying? Not even just a criticism, but just an observation. And it's their experience. It's like blowing off your kids' experience. Like when they get in trouble, after a child gets chastised and disciplined, my kids, they feel a certain kind of way. They're gonna come back and they're gonna say, "Mom, you hurt my feelings." Now we need to talk about it. And as a parent, I can talk about it and let my child know where I'm coming from. And I feel it's the same dynamic when you have leadership or any person like that or any institution or whatever. Just listen and take that person seriously, because nobody is going above and beyond in these situations to be heard. And people try so hard to be heard, and we're talking about this, but it's regular people, regular 9 to 5 people, single moms, single fathers, kids coming out of foster care, going into adulthood, that don't engage in all of this stuff, all of these community politics and all of that kind of stuff. But we're constantly creating these things that are saying, we're here to save your life. We coming to fix it. We're going to fix your situation. Okay, well, my situation is really, really messed up. And so when I come to you for this assistance and a solution, and you give me half, you halfway helping me, or you're not doing anything that's changed my situation, now I got to let you know how you put me in an even more compromising situation. And you shouldn't feel no kind of way about that outside of apologizing or saying, I can find a better way. What can I do to make it better? That's that. Just listen. Just listen and be ready to tweak the behavior.
Sandra, Stefan, or Kelly, I want to add to that real quickly. Go ahead,
I'll add to that. I think I would say, if you're in a position of power, adding from everything that we've been learning throughout the pandemic, if you're in a position of power, really take a step back and think about, how are you within your organization, within your position, how are you allowing individuals to be able to come to you and talk about, these racial or power dynamics that are at play, right? How are you allowing that listening or that communication or that dialogue to happen, right? Because we know that these things are, they're historical, right? They have been systemic in the community, but ultimately they're very oppressive, and we need to be able to get over those hurdles so that we can move forward, not allowing them to keep on happening, right? And so we need new processes. I think this was something that I think to highlight that Kelly was bringing up in the previous comment, right? If we how do we move forward? How do we create new ways, right, to solve these issues, right? If you're a person in a position of power, right, I think it's your job and your duty to be able to figure that out so that we can move forward, right? And so I think this is the moment, right, after we've been through almost 3 years of a lot of stress and strife in the community, right, that's highlighted this. Like, let's figure it out. And if you need help figuring it out, call in community, call in the organizers, right, call in the people on the ground. Like, we're here to help. And if not, like, I think you're going to be in for more of the same if you have been called out before, because that's the tool, that's the resource that we have to be able to get what we need to be able to move forward.
That's real. Yeah. Kelly?
So I agree with some of what Esteban said. And I think that we do have power as individuals, right? We have to step into it, have a sense of it. It just makes me think about undoing racism and the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond and their principles, and really like struggling together, and that we not coming to save nobody, right? Like we have to stop thinking that we can fix, like we should be fixing people, because a lot of people are in these situations because our systems created it. So we need to be more about fixing systems, right? And the more we fix systems, the trifling people go away. They get out of those systems, right? They don't want to be in a culture where we're helping community get a sense of their own power, right? That's different, I think, than than sort of the approaches that we see now. Is a lot of, it's like my mentor and friend, when I think about this, like the difference between solidarity and charity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the power dynamic and what that's about, and who's making money off of a lot of this, right? And why, I think people gotta live, right? We live in this system, so people gotta be okay, but a lot of us make money off of poor people. Our organizations, I work for the city. I'm not away from that. And also, like us as gatekeepers, and this is directly from the People's Institute, everyone is a gatekeeper. If you control information, resources, people, you are a gatekeeper in some kind of way. So we just have to be accountable gatekeepers. And that's really the difference, because I know a lot of times we think, the leader or the person who has institutional power is the person that's going to lead change, but that ain't how it works. History shows us that the only way that stuff changes is shifts from the bottom. It's always about the people on the bottom and the outside pushing. And that don't mean they can't have co-conspirators internally, right? That's like giving information, but it has to be an inside-outside strategy. It can never be, like, oh, I'm benevolent leader over here at the, University of blah, 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 and I'm going to fix it. Nah, that don't never happen. That don't never happen. And people that watch the folks that we get in leadership that promise that, because they ain't right. Watch them. Sorry.
That's real. Sandra, I want to get your voice in. Go ahead. That's real, Kelly. Thank you for that.
Can I ask you to repeat the question? I got distracted because the power went out over here, but the Wi-Fi is working. The Wi-Fi seems to be working okay. So can you repeat the question?
What advice do you have for the folks who've been called out? So we heard listen, and then Kelly was just saying about it's not just individual. You got to focus on bigger than that. Go ahead, Sandra.
I would say to really slow down and listen and do an honest, like a real honest inventory or reckoning. I think accountability, meaningful accountability, is more than an apology. It means really thinking about the harm that we've done, even through that defensiveness that shows up, and apologizing, repairing, and then working towards really changing behavior. And so I think really slowing down and listening and looking at our behavior.
I appreciate that. Thank you for that.
This has been great. We appreciate y'all. There's so much great information here. I want to thank Sandra Olarte Hayes, Tiffany Washington, Kelly Coleman, and Esteban Delgado for sharing your lived experiences with Call Out Culture and for the work you are doing to achieve equity in the greater Austin region.
And thank you to our audience. So please take a few minutes to share your thoughts on today's panel by completing our short survey. And we hope you'll join us in May. The topic will be human trafficking in Central Texas, and it's going to be a great session. Again, thanks to all of you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day, and see you next month.